Michael and Jack were sitting at a table in a small cafe on the corner. Outside the window, on a warm summer day, the bustle of the city lazily flowed. People hurried along the sidewalks, cars drove by, the air conditioner hummed faintly. The friends regularly met here during their lunch break. Michael worked nearby in the office of an insurance company, and Jack was in sales at an electronics store across the street. The cafe with its homemade pastries and aromatic coffee became their quiet haven in the midst of the workday. "How's it going at home?" Jack asked, taking a sip of his Americano. He was an old friend of Michael's. They had been friends since college and were used to sharing news with each other frankly. Jack had known Laura, Michael's wife, for many years and treated their family almost like his own. Michael shrugged and twirled his cappuccino cup in his hands, a slight weariness in his gesture. "Everything is fine," he answered after a pause. "Laura is currently swamped with work. She always stays late. We hardly see each other on weekdays." Jack nodded understandingly. "Yes, I know. Rachel has been late too on a new project. Laura is probably working overtime too because of her projects." Michael nodded, though a shadow of worry flickered in his eyes. He had indeed seen his wife less often than usual in the last couple of weeks. Laura attributed it to the rush job she had to hand in before submitting some important report. He believed her, trying not to be jealous of his work. But sometimes he missed her attention. Michael pushed those thoughts aside and changed the subject, asking Jack about his weekend plans. A few minutes later, when the friends were finishing their sandwiches, an acquaintance approached their table. It was Susan, an old friend of Laura's. Seeing Michael and Jack, she smiled happily and greeted them. "Oh, hello. What a meeting." Susan carefully placed the tray with her order on the next empty table and approached her friends. "Haven't seen you for a long time." Michael smiled too. "Hello, Susan. Indeed, it's been a while since we've crossed paths." Jack nodded politely to her and began to gather the sandwich wrappers from the table, preparing to throw out the trash. He realized that Michael and Susan had a lot to talk about, since she was closer to Laura. Michael turned to Susan. "How are you?" he asked, looking at her. "How are you?" "Everything's fine," she answered animatedly. "I work a little, and I have enough family concerns. And how are you and Laura?" "We're okay." Michael hesitated for a second, but tried to hide his confusion. "Everything is as usual, work home. Nothing new." Susan nodded affirmatively and suddenly said, "By the way, a cool cafe opened on 5th Avenue. It's called Bluebird. I met Laura there by chance last week." "Really?" Michael raised his eyebrows. He found this surprising. Laura hadn't said anything about going to new cafes. "When exactly?" Susan didn't notice the change in his tone and continued, smiling. "Last Tuesday, around lunchtime. I popped in for a takeaway coffee and saw Laura. We chatted for a couple of minutes. She wasn't alone. She was with some guy. I didn't want to interrupt, just said hello. I figured she was probably a coworker or a client. Anyway, Bluebird is a nice place. You'd like it with her. Maybe we could go together sometime." Michael felt his insides tighten. He held a smile, but his mind was already racing to make sense of what he'd just heard. Tuesday afternoon. But Laura had said she'd be out all day Tuesday with clients in a neighboring town. She'd returned late Tuesday night, citing a meeting after that trip. There had been nothing suspicious about her words then. But now, Jack, standing next to the tray, glanced quickly at his friend. He seemed to have noticed that Michael had suddenly turned pale, even though he was trying to remain calm. "Yes, I'll have to look," Michael answered automatically after a pause. "Thanks for the advice, Susan." Susan seemed to sense the strangeness of the situation as well. Her smile faded slightly. "Well, I'll be glad if you like it," she added uncertainly. "Then say hello to Laura." "Of course," Michael nodded. Laura's friend took her tray and, saying goodbye, went to her table. She looked slightly puzzled. Apparently, only now she realized that she might have said too much. Michael watched her go, trying to keep a straight face, but inside he was turning over. Jack sat back down opposite his friend and quietly asked, "What was that? What Tuesday is she talking about?" Michael shook his head, looking into his cup of cold cappuccino. "I have no idea. Laura didn't mention going into the cafe, and especially not with anyone." He tried to speak calmly, but Jack could hear the tension in his voice. Michael's chest ached uncomfortably. He replayed Susan's words, "Was not alone with some man." What man? A colleague? A client? Why hadn't Laura said anything? Maybe just a colleague, Jack suggested cautiously. Or a client, as Susan thought. You know, Laura is sociable. She could have met him on the job. Maybe, Michael nodded, but he didn't believe his own words. Laura usually told him if she was having lunch with colleagues or clients, especially in a new place, knowing that they liked to discover cafes together on weekends. It was strange that she kept silent. The friends fell silent. Michael tried to cope with the anxiety that was sweeping over him. He didn't want to jump to conclusions everything could be explained reasonably. But the suspicion that had crept in had already taken root in his mind. "How are you?" Jack asked quietly, trying to assess his friend's condition. Michael took a deep breath and forced himself to smile. "It's normal. Probably nonsense. It was just unexpected to hear." Jack squeezed his friend's shoulder lightly and nodded, not wanting to pursue the topic further in a crowded place. "Listen, I have to run to the store already. Shall we call each other in the evening?" "Yes, of course." Michael also stood up, getting ready to leave. As he said goodbye, Jack looked Michael in the eyes. "Try not to get worked up too much, okay? Maybe it really is nothing special." "Uh-huh," Michael muttered and tried to smile. "See you later." He turned and walked slowly down the street towards his office, lost in thought. For the rest of the day, Michael found it difficult to concentrate on his work. Numbers and reports swam before his eyes. Several times, he found himself replaying his morning conversation with Susan over and over again. Tuesday, around lunchtime. Not alone, with some guy. The words stuck in his head, causing a twinge of jealousy and anxiety. A colleague at the next table noticed Michael sitting staring at the monitor and gave him a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Hey, Michael, are you okay? You don't seem like yourself today." Michael came out of his thoughts and smiled tensely. "Yes, sorry, I was just thinking about my own things." To calm himself, he forced himself to finish the necessary report by the end of the day. However, as soon as the work was over, the anxiety returned with renewed vigor. On the way home, Michael decided he needed to talk to Laura and find out what had happened on Tuesday. He did not want to ask directly about some man. What if there really was nothing special, and he would offend his wife with suspicions in vain? Better to start with a neutral question. When Michael walked into their cozy suburban home that evening, Laura was just setting the table for dinner. The smell of herb-roasted chicken wafted from the kitchen. Usually, this aroma instantly lifted Michael's spirits. He loved home evenings with his wife after a long day. But today, his heart sank. "Hello, darling," Laura peeked out from behind the kitchen door with a smile. The light from the lamp illuminated her face with a warm glow. She looked as beautiful as always. Her neat business suit had been replaced at home with comfortable jeans and a soft sweater. Her reddish hair was gathered into a careless bun. In this homely setting, she seemed so familiar and close that Michael felt momentarily ashamed of his suspicions. He forced himself to smile. "Hello, it smells delicious. I thought I'd treat you to dinner tonight," Laura said, returning to the stove. "It's been a while since I've made rosemary chicken." Michael hung his jacket over the back of a chair in the living room and walked into the kitchen, trying to act normal. He kissed his wife on the cheek, feeling the familiar warmth of her skin, and closed his eyes for a second. He wanted so much to believe that everything was the same. They sat down at a small round table in the kitchen. Laura poured mineral water into glasses. They tried not to drink alcohol on weekdays. Michael mechanically tried the tender chicken fillet and praised the taste. For a few minutes, they exchanged the usual phrases about the past day. Laura told how she managed to successfully conduct a presentation for a new client. Michael briefly mentioned his routine in the office. During a pause between conversations, Laura suddenly said, "Oh yeah, I almost forgot to tell you. A funny thing happened last week. Do you know the Bluebird Cafe on Fifth Avenue?" Michael felt his stomach clench. He tried to look unperturbed and nodded. "I think I heard. What's wrong with him?" Laura put down her glass. "On Tuesday, when I was returning from a work trip, I stopped there for a coffee, and I met Susan, my friend, there. Can you imagine what a coincidence?" She spoke with a slight smile, as if it were truly a sweet, casual incident. Michael carefully placed his fork on his plate. His heart began to beat faster. Laura herself started the conversation, anticipating his question. "Yes, I can imagine," he replied, trying to keep his voice calm. "You crossed paths on Tuesday. You were with clients all day on Tuesday, weren't you?" "Well, the meeting ended earlier than planned," Laura explained without batting an eyelid. "We were done by lunchtime, and on the way to the office, I decided to take a break and have a coffee. I called a colleague, and we met at Bluebird, discussed projects. And then I had another meeting that evening, so I didn't get home until closer to 9. She had delivered the explanation rather smoothly. Too smoothly? Michael felt his palms sweating under the table. He nodded reluctantly and took a sip of water to buy himself a few seconds. "I see," he drawled. "It's good that you had at least a little free time on Tuesday." "Yes, I'm glad myself." Laura smiled and touched his hand on the table. "It's a pity you weren't there, otherwise we could have gone there together. A very nice cafe, cozy." Michael squeezed her fingers a little tighter than usual, peering into his wife's face. He wanted to see at least some shadow of embarrassment or deceit. But Laura looked completely calm. She met his gaze with a slight question. "Something wrong?" He quickly removed his hand and pushed back his chair, standing up. "It's okay, everything's fine. I'll be right back, okay?" Laura nodded, watching him go. Michael went into the living room, claiming he'd forgotten his phone in his jacket pocket. In reality, he needed a few seconds to compose himself. He pulled out his phone and saw the screen was blank. He unlocked it, nothing new. No text from Laura that day, other than her usual, "Got here, be late on Tuesday night." A minute later, he returned to the kitchen, trying to act casual. Laura was already clearing the plates. "Are you finished? Maybe you want more?" she asked. "No, thank you. It was delicious," Michael replied. "Let me wash the dishes." "Don't worry, I'll rinse it out quickly myself," Laura objected and began loading the plates into the dishwasher. Michael remembered texting her around noon on Tuesday, but getting no response for a long time. Then Laura called back only a couple of hours later, citing a lack of reception on the highway. Now he wondered, maybe she hadn't been in the car at that time, but in that very cafe. Thoughts, one darker than the other, swarmed through his head. He tried to find logical explanations. What if that man really was just a colleague? "Michael," Laura called, finishing with the dishwasher. "You're kind of quiet today. Are you tired?" He flinched at the sound of her voice, as if he had been caught red-handed. Trying not to show his excitement, Michael replied, "Yes, a little tired. It was a hard day." Laura smiled sympathetically. "Then maybe we should go to bed early. I didn't get enough sleep either." "Go, I'll check my mail in another 10 minutes and then join you." He nodded. Laura came out of the kitchen. A few minutes later, Michael heard her getting ready for bed in the bedroom behind the closed door. He sat down heavily on the living room sofa and covered his face with his hands. Now he had almost no doubt. Laura was hiding something. Maybe she was cheating on him. The thought made him feel sick. Images flashed in his head. Laura sitting in a cafe with a strange man, smiling at someone else the same way she had once smiled at him. Michael stood up abruptly, feeling that he could no longer just sit there. He walked quietly into the hallway. The bedroom door was closed. He didn't look in. He heard Laura go to bed. Instead, Michael crept into the small office where their shared computer was located and papers were lying around. On the table, among other things, he noticed Laura's diary. She usually used the electronic calendar on her phone, but sometimes she wrote things down by hand. With bated breath, Michael turned on the desk lamp and opened his diary to last week. Tuesday's page was almost empty, only the note, outbound to client Greenville. Michael carefully replaced the diary and turned off the lamp. His hands were shaking. He quietly walked back into the living room and sat down, trying to think about the situation. So far, he had only circumstantial evidence, a strange feeling and a discrepancy in the stories. There was no direct evidence. To accuse Laura now would mean causing a scandal if he was wrong. But Michael almost didn't believe he was wrong. Too many things didn't add up. Laura's calm appearance at dinner only increased his anxiety. Either she was a very skillful liar, or she really was innocent. He needed to know the truth. The bed creaked softly in the bedroom. Laura turned over in her sleep or half-sleep. Michael looked into the darkness of the corridor. The next morning, Michael woke up exhausted. He hadn't been able to sleep soundly that night. Anxious thoughts kept pulling him out of his half-sleep. Laura didn't seem to suspect anything. She kissed him before leaving for work as tenderly as usual and disappeared through the front door with the usual, "I love you, have a nice day." Michael responded automatically, feeling empty inside. He arrived at work early, and the first thing he did was find Susan's number in his phone. They rarely called each other alone, but now Michael was determined to talk to his wife's friend. Before the office filled up with colleagues, he went outside and moved away from the entrance. Susan answered on the second ring. "Hello, Michael." "Hi." Michael's voice was tense, and he swallowed hard. "Susan, we need to talk. Can you meet today?" There was a brief silence on the line, then Susan asked hesitantly, "Is it because of Laura?" "Yes," he answered briefly. He didn't want to ask directly over the phone. Susan let out a quiet breath. "Okay, let's meet after work, around 6, at the Riverside Cafe on Main Street. You know it?" "I know. I'll be there," Michael replied. The day dragged on painfully slowly. Michael barely spoke to anyone in the office, citing being busy. He buried himself in his work, trying to block out his imagination, but his thoughts kept returning to the upcoming conversation. Deep down, he was afraid of what Susan might say, but he was even more afraid of not knowing. By 6 o'clock in the evening, Michael was already sitting in the half-empty Riverside Cafe, located on the shore of a small city pond. He chose a table in the corner, away from the other customers. Outside the window, the sun was slowly setting, turning the water of the pond golden. Usually, Michael liked this place for its tranquility, but now he did not notice the beauty around him. Susan arrived shortly after 6. She looked slightly nervous, her shoulders tense, her handbag in her hands, fiddling with the strap. When she saw Michael, Susan smiled timidly and sat down at the table. "Hello," she said quietly. "Hello," Michael nodded. He set aside his almost untouched cup of coffee. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." Susan took off her coat and hung it neatly over the back of a chair. She looked guilty. "I can guess why you called me," she said, looking down. Michael clasped his hands together on the table, trying to maintain his composure. "I appreciate you coming. I really need to understand. What's going on? You mentioned seeing Laura with a man yesterday at the cafe. I don't want to jump to any false conclusions, so I was hoping you'd give me more details." Susan nervously smoothed out the napkin on the table. "Michael, I honestly don't know much. This is all very awkward. Laura is my friend, but you are my friend too, so to speak, and I'm caught between two fires." "I understand," he nodded tensely, "and I'm sorry to drag you into this, but I can't ask Laura. She won't tell you the truth. Please, Susan, I need to know if you know anything. You saw them with your own eyes." Susan looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "I feel terrible. I probably should have kept quiet yesterday, but I accidentally blurted it out in front of you, and I realized that you didn't know anything." Michael closed his eyes slightly, holding back the bitterness that washed over him. "That is, there was something to know about. So, there is something after all, right?" Susan shook her head. "I'm not sure about anything. I can only tell you what I saw, and then you decide for yourself how to understand it." "Okay, please tell me," he asked quietly. Laura's friend looked toward the window, collecting her thoughts. She was silent for a few seconds, then spoke quietly. That day, Tuesday, I actually happened to walk into the Bluebird at about 12:30. When I walked in, I saw Laura right away. She was sitting at a table in the corner with a man. They were talking animatedly about something. I went over to say hello. Susan closed her eyes for a moment, as if reliving the moment. When I approached, they seemed to move away from each other a little. It seemed to me that Laura had been sitting very close to him before. Maybe it was my imagination. She introduced this man to me like a colleague. She said, "This is Mike, my colleague." I remember being surprised that the colleague had the same name as you. Michael tensed. Colleague Mike? I don't know any Mike from her office. I don't remember her mentioning it either, Susan sighed. Anyway, they seemed a little embarrassed when I approached. I said hello, we exchanged a few words, then said I wouldn't bother them and went to get my order. They seemed to react normally, but something just pricked me. Laura's face looked like she was a little scared. The next day I called her and asked her point blank who the man was. Laura hesitated at first, and then admitted that he was an old acquaintance with whom they had recently reconnected. She said it was nothing special, just a friendly lunch. Michael's heart pounded loudly. He listened, holding his breath, afraid to interrupt. Just a friendly lunch, he repeated slowly. Do you believe me? Susan shook her head, looking down. Not really. Laura asked me not to tell anyone. She said that you might misunderstand, get jealous for no reason. So she asked me not to tell you, Michael quietly stated. Michael, Susan reached across the table and timidly touched his hand. I'm so sorry. I still don't know the whole truth. Maybe nothing really happened. But you don't think so, do you? He asked bluntly, looking into her eyes. Susan blushed and looked away. I saw the way he looked at her, and the way she smiled back at him. It didn't look like just a friendly conversation between colleagues. Laura had this face. Even then, I thought she looked in love. She trailed off, realizing how cutting those words were. Michael felt the ground slipping out from under his feet. In love. The word struck him with a sharp pain. He leaned back in his chair, trying to maintain his composure, but his eyes were already burning. I didn't want to believe it. He exhaled. Thank you for being honest. Susan wiped away the tears that had appeared with a napkin. Forgive me. It hurts me too to say all this. I didn't mean to interfere. It's not your fault, Michael shook his head. There was a lump in his throat, but he didn't feel any anger at Susan, only bitterness and disappointment. You tried to be a friend to both of us. It's just the situation. He didn't finish, but Susan understood. She asked quietly, So what are you going to do now? Michael was silent for a few seconds, collecting his thoughts. What would he do? It seemed that until this moment he had not allowed himself to think beyond simply knowing the truth. Now the truth, or at least the evidence of it, was staring him in the face, inexorable. Laura had probably betrayed his trust. What course of action could he take in such a case? Forgive and forget? Pretend he knew nothing? No, that was beyond him. I don't know, he finally said dully. I'll talk to her. Later. I'm not ready yet. Maybe I need proof so she won't get out of it. Susan nodded. I understand. Just promise me that you won't do anything stupid. What do you mean? Michael frowned. Well, she hesitated. Don't rush into her or that man. I know you're hurt and offended right now, but try to maintain your dignity no matter how difficult it is, and take care of yourself. Michael smiled sadly. I'll try. I'm not going to hit anyone, if that's what you mean. Susan looked down. I'm glad you're holding on, even though you probably feel terrible inside right now. He closed his eyes, trying to get his emotions under control. Yes, it's terrible. It's like... He hesitated, choosing his words like everything inside has become empty, to be honest. Susan looked at him sadly. Michael, you deserve to be happy. If Laura really did this, it's mean. Michael remained silent, unable to find anything to say. They sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Susan said quietly, I'll try to talk to Laura, maybe bring her to her senses somehow. I don't want you to break up, but I don't want her to lead you on either. I don't know if it will help, he sighed wearily. Now she will know that I suspect something. Maybe. After yesterday, I wrote to her that I spilled the beans to you, Susan admitted. She called, she was all worked up, asked what exactly I said. I reassured her that it was almost nothing, but I think she's nervous. Michael smiled wryly, afraid that I will reveal the deception. I don't know. Susan shook her head. Maybe she's afraid, or maybe she's ashamed. She seems confused about herself. Susan looked at him sympathetically. I'm sorry, Michael. I wish I could say something encouraging. Maybe this is a mistake and everything will work out for you. He shook his head. Even if this is some kind of ridiculous flirtation on her part, how can we fix things after that? She lied to me, right to my face. Not for the first time, apparently. There was a note of bitterness in her voice. Susan offered cautiously. Maybe you should visit a family psychologist. I heard that sometimes it helps to cope with such crises. Michael smiled sadly. I don't know. First, we need to get her to be honest, and then we'll see. They said goodbye around 7 in the evening. Susan hugged Michael goodbye, and he suddenly felt his eyes filling with tears again. He held them back with difficulty. Susan said quietly, Take care of yourself. If you need anything, call me, okay? Thank you, he whispered. Michael didn't go home right away after meeting Susan. He felt that in his current state, he wouldn't be able to look Laura in the eye without worry. Instead, he dialed Jack's number. It was almost evening, and a cool breeze slid under Michael's light jacket as he stood by his parked car. Jack answered immediately. Hi, Mike. How are you? Michael could tell from his friend's voice that Jack had been worried about him since their conversation in the cafe the morning before. Michael swallowed. Hi, listen, can you meet today? I need your help, or at least just to talk. Of course, Jack responded without hesitation. Come to my place. Rachel is just putting the kids to bed. We'll be in the office. No one will disturb us. Thank you, I'll be there soon. About half an hour later, Michael was sitting in a comfortable leather chair in Jack's house. His friend's office, though small, always seemed like a calm place to him. There were family photos on the walls, books and souvenirs on the shelves. Jack poured them both a glass of whiskey, although they usually tried not to drink on weekdays. But today was an exceptional occasion. Well, tell me, Jack said quietly, sitting down opposite him on the sofa. I take it you're talking about Laura. Michael nodded and took a small sip of his drink, which burned his throat but actually helped him to compose himself. He briefly recounted the events of the last 2 days, the chance conversation with Susan, the suspicions, the tense dinner with Laura last night, and the meeting with Susan today. Jack listened attentively, without interrupting, although Michael could see from the way he frowned and clenched his teeth that his friend was as shocked and angry as he was. Damn, Jack swore quietly when Michael fell silent. I can't believe it. Laura and some guy? Are you sure? Michael ran his hand tiredly over his face. I'd like to say no, but Susan pretty much confirmed that Laura is with him. Well, that it looks like an affair. Jack clenched his fists. He was a straightforward and hot-blooded man, and now he could barely contain his emotions. I have no words. How are you holding up? I don't know yet, Michael admitted. It's like I'm on autopilot. If I stop and start feeling, I'll probably go crazy. Jack nodded with an understanding look. Look, we'll figure something out. Are you going to talk to her? Yes, but not now, Michael shook his head. She denies everything and hides everything. She'll say we got it all wrong. I need proof, Jack. Concrete proof. Jack was silent for a moment, looking at the dark window of the office. Then he asked quietly, Were you thinking about a private detective? Michael looked up at him. The thought of professional surveillance had already crossed his mind, but he hadn't yet decided to voice it. I don't know. You have to follow someone, take pictures, like in a movie. They do it in real life too, Jack answered seriously. Remember Tony from my department? His wife went on the loose a year ago. So he found out everything through the detective. It hurt, of course, but otherwise she would have taken him for a fool. Michael tapped his finger nervously on his glass. The idea of hiring surveillance made him uneasy, but the situation apparently called for it. Where can I find such a person? I can ask Tony for his contacts, Jack offered immediately. I'll ask tomorrow. In the meantime, I think you should be on your guard. Maybe check your phone records, your bills. Maybe something will pop up. Yes, you're right, Michael agreed. He had thought about it before. We should try. They discussed a few more details. Jack firmly promised to negotiate with the detective if Michael decided to do it. He also suggested that Michael not be shy about asking for help, at least to spend the night at their place if things were hard at home, or to have a fun time together on the weekend. Michael thanked his friend, feeling great support and relief that he was not left alone with the trouble. When he got home, it was approaching 10 o'clock. The lights were on in the windows of their house. Michael took a few deep breaths before entering. He tried to come up with a plausible explanation for his late arrival. He decided to say that he had stopped by to talk to Jack about his new project at work. But he didn't need an excuse. He was met in the hallway by darkness and silence. Laura was already asleep, or at least in the bedroom behind a closed door. Michael quietly walked into the living room. He noticed a note from his wife on the table. "Are you staying late? I'm going to bed. Love you." Laura's neat handwriting, a heart at the end. He glanced at his phone. There were missed calls from Laura, 2 around 8 o'clock. She was probably worried about why he wasn't home. Michael ignored these attempts to contact her and wasn't ready to talk to her. Now, in the quiet of the living room at night, he finally had the time and opportunity to search for evidence. Michael pulled out his laptop and opened it on the kitchen table. He remembered that he and Laura had signed up for a family cell phone plan a few years ago, and he had access to call details through his operator account. A few minutes later, there on the screen was a list of Laura's incoming and outgoing calls over the past few months. Michael scrolled through the dates, looking for anything out of the ordinary. What caught his eye was that in the last couple of months, Laura had often called someone late at night or received calls around 10 or 11 at night. The number was the same, unfamiliar to Michael. Most often, the calls were short a minute, apparently. They called each other, and then long conversations lasting half an hour or an hour. His heart sank. Thinking back, Michael realized that at those times he was already asleep or busy with his own affairs in another room, and Laura was speaking quietly, probably on the phone, explaining that her friend was telling her about her problems or that her mother couldn't get through until late. He didn't check. He trusted. Michael's breathing quickened, but he forced himself to continue. He wrote down the unfamiliar number on a piece of paper. The details also reflected the messages. On those same days, during the day, there were a series of messages to the same number, dozens of messages, judging by the number of entries. Michael bit his lip until it hurt. It seemed as if the black and white lines on the screen were screaming at him that his wife was leading a double life. He tried to find out who the number was registered to, but the operator's system did not provide such data. An official request was needed. Then he turned to his bank account. He and Laura had separate accounts, but a joint credit card for household expenses. Laura usually used her personal card for her purchases, but some large purchases went through the joint card. Michael logged into his bank account and pulled up his transaction history. Looking through the shopping lists, he noticed familiar stores, supermarkets, utility bills, gas, and then a line that made his heart stop. March 14th, Lakeview Inn, $250. March 14th. He immediately remembered. In mid-March, Michael went to visit his mother in another state for the weekend, visiting his parents. Laura couldn't go, citing work pressure, and so, that very weekend, the hotel bill was charged to their card. His hands shook on the keyboard. Michael closed his eyes, trying to banish the image. Laura and this unknown man spending the night together in a hotel. Their hotel, on their shared money. It was too much. He stood up from the table and walked around the dark living room. The lump inside him was seething, a mixture of rage and pain. It seemed impossible to breathe from understanding the scale of the betrayal. After a few minutes, he finally forced himself to sit up and do one more thing. He carefully made his way into the bedroom. Laura was sleeping quietly on their wide bed, her back to the door. In the moonlight, her figure under the blanket looked so peaceful and carefree that Michael shuddered. There was a phone on the nightstand next to her side of the bed. They had never set passwords between them before there was no need. Michael carefully picked up the device and pressed the button. A PIN code request appeared. His heart sank. The code was enabled. Shaking, he tried to dial, no result. Laura must have recently changed her password. Michael quietly returned the phone to its place and slipped out of the bedroom. Back in the kitchen, he glanced at his notes, the phone number, the hotel receipt. That, coupled with Susan's words and his own instincts, was enough to make him almost certain of infidelity. But Michael wanted final clarity and perhaps some more proof that couldn't be denied. He was determined he would use the detective, as Jack had suggested. Michael took a few sips of water, trying to calm himself. He had a lot to do tomorrow. He needed to meet with the private detective Jack had recommended and discuss the plan. The morning was cold and overcast, as if the weather sympathized with Michael's mood. He got up early, having barely slept, and immediately checked his phone. A message from Jack had arrived at dawn. A friend had sent the contact information of a private detective named Mark Reynolds, the same one his colleague had contacted. Under the name was a phone number and a short note from Jack. "I called him. He's expecting your call today." Michael saved the number. Laura, meanwhile, was getting ready for work as if nothing had happened, blow-drying her hair, choosing an outfit. They barely spoke. Michael cited a headache and quietly drank coffee, avoiding looking at his wife. When Laura left, kissing him goodbye on the cheek, Michael exhaled and immediately dialed the detective's number. His hands were shaking a little. The other end answered almost immediately. Mark Reynolds speaking. "Hello, Mr. Reynolds. My name is Michael." Michael stopped, realizing that he didn't know how to start. "Jack Williams recommended your number to me. I have a personal problem, and I need your help." The detective spoke in a calm, trustworthy voice. "Yes, Jack warned me that you would call. We can meet and discuss everything in person. Are you free today?" "Yes, of course," Michael answered quickly. "Tell me where and when, and I'll be there." They agreed to meet in 2 hours at a small office downtown where Mark's agency was located. Michael drove there, barely noticing the morning traffic. His heart was pounding as if he were driving to an exam or a date. He had never encountered detectives before and didn't know what to expect. The office was on the second floor of a nondescript building. The sign on the door read, "Reynolds and Associates, Detective Agency." Michael walked up the creaky stairs and knocked hesitantly. Mark himself opened the door, a short man of about 50 with piercing gray eyes. He had short, dark hair, gray at the temples, and the calm, slightly tired face of a man who had seen a lot. "Mr. Davis?" the detective asked, holding out his hand. "Yes, hello. Just Michael is fine," he replied, shaking her hand. Mark's palm was dry and hard. "Come in." Mark stepped back, letting the guest inside. The office consisted of a reception area and an office behind a glass partition. There was no one in the reception area. Apparently, the secretary showed up at a different time. Mark invited Michael into the office and pointed to a chair opposite his desk. The furnishings were modest: a desk, 2 chairs, a cabinet with files, a calendar on the wall, and a couple of black and white photographs of the city. When they sat down, the detective looked at Michael carefully. "So, tell me what happened and how I can help." Michael felt his palms grow sweaty. He swallowed. "I have a suspicion that my wife is cheating on me. I need evidence to be sure." Mark nodded without surprise, apparently. For him, this was a typical reason for contacting him. "Tell me everything that might be useful. Your wife's name, where she works, her daily routine, why suspicions arose." Michael recounted the key points in detail. Mark listened without interrupting, only occasionally asking for details. Time, addresses, makes of cars owned by Michael and Laura, whether they had children. When Michael finished, the detective thought for a few seconds. "I see," he said then. "The situation is, unfortunately, not uncommon. You need evidence photographs, reports of her movements, right?" "Yes, I need to know exactly who she's dating and when," Michael quietly confirmed, feeling bitterly ashamed of these words. But there was nothing to be done. "Okay, I'll take on the case. Usually, in such cases, we conduct surveillance of the subject, in this case, your spouse, during periods when she claims to be busy at work or elsewhere, and you suspect that she may be with a lover." Michael nodded. "She often stays late at the office in the evenings, especially on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She also sometimes meets with clients on weekends, at least that's what she says." "Great. First, let's make a schedule." Mark took out a notebook. "Today is Thursday. You say she might be late. We'll start today. Do you know where she is now? In the office?" "Yes, she should be at work until the evening," Michael answered, glancing at his watch. It was around noon. "She usually comes back after 7, sometimes later." The detective made notes. "I'll drive up to her office at 6 and watch where she goes after work. I'll also watch on Tuesday and other necessary days. If she meets someone somewhere, I'll find out. We'll also try to find out the man's identity if he shows up." Michael's heart sank as Mark spoke so directly of the man. But he remained silent and nodded. "A few questions," the detective continued in a businesslike tone. "Do you have a photo of your wife, so that my people can identify her right away?" Michael pulled out his phone and found a recent photo of Laura, smiling in front of their house. He handed the phone to Mark. Mark remembered the image and handed it back. "Also, if you can find out the car number or the appearance of the alleged lover. You said his name is Mike, a colleague." "Yes, although I'm not sure if that's his real name or if he's really a colleague. Susan said that's how Laura introduced him at the cafe." "I see. Let's assume that the name can be anything. Can you describe it externally?" Michael shrugged. "Susan didn't really describe him. She just said he was about our age, maybe a little older, dark hair. But that's very approximate." "No problem, we'll find out," Mark said confidently. "Now about the organizational part. For starters, I think about a week of observation. That's usually enough to find something. Our rates are so much per hour of work, plus expenses. Prepayment for at least 3 days." He named the sum. Michael winced to himself. It was a considerable sum, but out loud he merely said, "Got it. Money is not a problem." He wrote out a check for the agreed amount. It felt strange to pay for surveillance of his own wife, but the rational part of him knew that there was no other way to find out the truth. "Great," Mark nodded, putting the check away. "Then let's get started. I'll keep in touch. Prefer by phone or email?" "Call her mobile, but not too late at night so she can't hear," Michael asked. "Or write messages." "Okay. As soon as there is important information, I will let you know." Michael stood up, his heart pounding, but now with determination and anxious anticipation. "Thank you." Mark smiled slightly at the corner of his lips. "We will try to help. And another piece of advice, you will have to be patient. Perhaps the first few days will not clarify anything, but usually the truth comes out." "I understand," Michael nodded. His throat was dry. "Thank you." Shaking the detective's hand goodbye, he left the office. Outside, the cold wind hit his face, and Michael took a deep breath. The first step had been taken. Now came the hard part, waiting and pretending everything was okay. The rest of the day dragged on painfully. Michael went back to work, but he couldn't think of anything except that Laura might now be being followed, that her lie would finally be caught. For the first time in a long time, he felt a strange relief. From now on, the truth was just a matter of time. That evening, he was reserved. Laura returned around 8, saying she was late because of a client meeting. Michael nodded and asked no questions. His insides were turning over. He wondered where she really was, whether the detective had taken any pictures. But they talked about trivialities, how his day had gone, whether he had eaten dinner. Michael answered in monosyllables, citing fatigue. Laura looked a little tense, as if she expected him to ask questions or complain. Perhaps she noticed his aloofness. But Michael was cautious. He knew it was too early to find out anything. At night, having made sure that Laura was asleep, he went out onto the porch of the house and called Jack. Whispering into the receiver, he briefly said, "That's it, I hired a detective. He already started today." "Hang in there, buddy," Jack said. "If anything happens, call me right away. It's all so disgusting. But you're doing the right thing." Michael thanked his friend and hung up. All that was left was to wait. The following days turned into a continuous test of patience for him. Mark contacted him sparingly, but regularly. He reported in a neutral tone, "Today your wife really was at work until 7, then went straight home." Or, "Over the weekend, your wife really went to a meeting with a client, was at the mall with a female colleague, nothing suspicious." Each such piece of news, on the one hand, eased Michael's soul. What if all this really was a mistake? But on the other hand, it made him even more nervous. But on Tuesday night, when Laura was on duty again, Michael received a text from Mark. "Important information. I need a private conversation." Seeing those words on the screen, Michael felt everything inside him collapse and flare up at the same time. It could only mean one thing. The detective had found what he was looking for. The next day, barely waiting for the morning, Michael went to the detective agency again. Reynolds's office was quiet. Mark greeted Michael with sympathetic seriousness and got down to business with little preamble. He invited him to sit down and placed a thin folder on the table. "Your wife met a man last night," Mark began calmly. "We recorded it." Michael felt a wave of nausea rise. The detective opened the folder. On the first page was a color photograph. Michael leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the image. In the picture, Laura was standing on the sidewalk outside a familiar office building, presumably her work, with a dark-haired man standing next to her. They looked at each other, and Laura was smiling. Mark switched the page. There were now several photographs, each detailing the sequence of events. At 7:20 p.m., Laura Davis left her office and headed straight for the parking lot instead of walking down the street. The detective commented clearly and neutrally, as if he were talking about the weather. A block away, there was a car waiting for her, a blue sedan. Here she is, approaching the car. In the next photo, Laura was leaning toward the open window of a car. Her face was excited, smiling. The man behind the wheel was hard to see, but you could make out his profile definitely the same as in the first photo. "She got in next to him," Mark continued, leafing through the materials. "Our employee followed them. They drove to the waterfront area. At 7:50, the car parked near the Marina restaurant on the embankment. Michael recognized the restaurant, a romantic spot overlooking the river where he and Laura had once gone for their anniversary. They dined there until about 9 p.m. The detective said, showing distant shots through the restaurant window, where figures at a table were blurred. Then they returned to the car. At 9:20, they arrived here. He turned the page. Michael saw a photo of the entrance to a small hotel, the familiar sign, Blue Crest Motel. Two figures were clearly visible under the lantern by the door. Laura and the man. He was holding her arm. They entered the hotel at 9:23. Mark's voice was calm, but Michael could hear the blood pounding in his ears. "Rooms are by the hour, a popular place for secret rendezvous." 2 hours later, at 11:30, they left together. Here's a picture of them saying goodbye near the car. In the last photo, Laura was standing close to the man at the open door of the sedan. He was leaning toward her. Even in the night lighting of the parking lot, you could see their faces were close, very close. They were kissing. There was silence in the office for a few seconds. Michael struggled to cope with the emotions that had washed over him as he looked at this final piece of evidence. His insides burned with pain and humiliation. Here it was, the visual confirmation of what he had feared. Mark carefully broke the silence. "I'm really sorry." Michael nodded, not looking up. He couldn't speak. His throat was constricted. He wanted to scream, but the sound was trapped inside. The detective, giving him time, quietly continued. We have a full report. Here are the dates, times, places, photographs attached. If needed for court or for some other reason, all the evidence is collected. Michael took a deep breath and asked hoarsely, Name. Did you manage to find out who he is? Mark nodded. Yes. We ran the car number through the database. The car is registered to Michael Handler, 38 years old. He is indeed your wife's colleague. He works as a financial consultant. Their firms cooperated. Married, 2 children. Michael broke out in a cold sweat from this new piece of information. Laura had gotten involved with a married man, a father. It all seemed like a dirty whirlpool into which he had been dragged against his will. I see, he said. Mark carefully folded the papers into a folder and pushed it towards Michael. Take it. If you need copies in electronic form, we will send them. Is there any point in continuing the surveillance, or have you received enough? That's enough, Michael quickly replied, feeling that he couldn't stand another day like this. He was afraid that otherwise he would break down completely. Thank you, Mark. The detective looked at him understandingly. I understand. If anything happens, I'm in touch. If you need my testimony or additional materials, contact me. Michael stood up, clutching the ill-fated folder with trembling fingers. Thank you, he repeated dully. I don't know how to get through this, but thank you for helping me find out the truth. Hang in there, Mark said quietly, walking him to the door. It's hard, but better the bitter truth than uncertainty. Michael just nodded. He walked out of the office in a daze. It was drizzling outside. The cold drops hit his face, sobering him up. Michael dialed his friend's number. He answered almost immediately. Michael, how are you? I received evidence. Everything was confirmed. Jack exhaled loudly. Damn, hang in there, buddy. Michael was silent for a few seconds, staring ahead with an unseeing gaze. Then he croaked. Listen, can I come? Of course, come immediately. Jack responded immediately. I'll be home. Michael passed out. He closed his eyes for a few moments, gathering his courage. Then he started the engine and pulled out onto the road, heading toward his best friend's house. Michael spent several hours at Jack's, which seemed both a moment and an eternity at the same time. He barely remembered how he got to his friend's house and how he entered, clutching a folder with photographs in his hands. Jack met him at the threshold and, seeing Michael's face, wordlessly hugged him tightly. This warm human gesture almost made Michael cry again, but he held back. The living room was quiet. Rachel, Jack's wife, came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, looking at Michael with concern. Oh my God, what happened? Jack answered for his friend, placing his hand gently on Michael's shoulder. Laura really was dishonest with him. Rachel threw up her hand. Oh, Michael, darling, I'm so sorry. She came up to him too and hugged him. Michael felt awkward from such attention, but gratitude to these people overwhelmed him. Thank you, everything is fine. I just need to recover a little. Jack sat him down on the couch. Rachel asked, maybe some tea or something to eat? You probably haven't eaten anything since this morning. I don't want any, thank you. Michael shook his head. There was a lump in his throat, and the thought of food was unbearable. Rachel nodded understandingly and sat down next to him, quietly saying, You don't have to tell, but if you suddenly want to talk, we're here. Michael silently opened the folder on his lap. He pulled out one of the photos, the one of Laura and her lover standing outside the hotel, embracing. He looked at it for a few seconds, then handed it to Jack and Rachel. Rachel covered her mouth with her hand as she looked at the picture, and Jack swore under his breath. Looking at Michael, his friend asked, Is this today? Last night, Michael answered hoarsely. The detective filmed it all. That's enough. Jack clenched his jaw. What the? He stopped short, glancing at his wife. The curses were just about ready to burst out, but he held back in front of Rachel. Michael ran his hand over his face. He's married. He has 2 children. That's how low she's sunk. Rachel shook her head in confusion. I just don't understand how Laura could. You were such a good couple. So many years together. Apparently, they weren't. Michael smiled bitterly. I thought everything was fine with us, but she. This has been going on for months, probably. She's been lying to me every day. As he said this, he felt bitterness mixing with anger. Before, there was more pain. Now, indignation, even anger, was becoming more and more apparent. What are you planning to do now? Jack asked cautiously, returning the photo to the folder. Michael looked up, his eyes reddened. I have to talk to her. No, not talk present everything and finish this. Rachel frowned. Finish? You mean divorce? Yes, 100% yes. I won't be able to live with her after this, as if nothing happened. I don't want to, and I can't. Jack nodded. I understand. And rightly so. Betrayals cannot be forgiven unless you yourself want to suffer for the rest of your life. Rachel sighed, her eyes also shining with tears of sympathy. It's very difficult, but we will support you in any way. Thank you, Michael said quietly. He felt grateful and awkward at the same time. Sorry to barge in with my problems. Stop it, Jack shook his head. We're family, Mike. You do the same for me. Rachel touched Michael's hand. Maybe you'll stay with us for the night. Don't go home today. Michael closed his eyes. He wanted to accept the offer to stay in a warm environment, to avoid a difficult conversation at least until tomorrow. But he had already made his decision. Thank you, but I have to, today. Jack looked at his friend carefully. Are you sure? What if you're emotional? Maybe you should get some sleep and cool off a bit. I won't cool down, Michael shook his head. I can't look her in the face and pretend I don't know. Every minute of lying is like poison. No, there's no point in dragging it out. Jack squeezed his shoulder. Then you and I can go with you if you want. I'll wait in the car just in case. Michael imagined how he would sort everything out with Laura in front of witnesses and shook his head. Thanks, Jack, but I can handle it. This is our conversation. Jack paused, then nodded reluctantly. As you wish. But promise, if anything happens, call me right away. At night or in the middle of a conversation, I'll come. I promise, Michael smiled weakly. It made him feel better that his friend was so worried. Rachel stood up. I'll pack you a container of dinner, okay? Maybe you can eat later when you've recovered a bit. Michael didn't refuse, he simply nodded. Thanks a lot. While she was in the kitchen putting food out, Michael and Jack sat in silence for a few more minutes. Finally, Michael said almost in a whisper, I loved her. I loved her so much. More than 10 years together. Jack looked down. I'm sorry, brother. Laura, she's stupid to trade your love for some pathetic romance. It doesn't matter anymore. Michael closed his eyes, feeling tired instead of tears. I just want to put an end to this. Rachel returned with a bag. Here, there's some stew and fresh bread. She obviously tried to take care of Michael at least this way. He thanked her sincerely. Soon he stood up. I think I should go. It's still early, but I'll go home. I don't know, maybe she'll come back late herself, but I'll wait. Jack and Rachel walked him to the exit. Rachel gave Michael a big hug as they parted. You hold on, do you hear? You're strong. Everything will pass. Thank you. Michael patted her on the back. You're wonderful. Jack also hugged his friend and said quietly, We are close, at any time of the day or night. Michael nodded at a loss for words. He walked back to the car. It was about 5 o'clock, which meant Laura was still at work. The most difficult few hours of his life lay ahead. On the way home, he caught himself thinking unexpectedly. For some reason, he was calm. His chest still ached from the blows of betrayal, but a deep determination to act brought a strange composure. Perhaps it was the numbness of shock, or perhaps the understanding that everything couldn't get any worse. Now all that was left was to get rid of the ruins of the old life and build a new one. The house was silent. Michael walked into the living room and dropped the folder of evidence on the coffee table. He didn't know if he would show it to Laura, but he'd keep it ready. Then he sank into a chair and waited, listening to every sound of passing cars outside the window and mechanically going over in his mind the words he would say to his wife when they met. Around 7 o'clock in the evening, the familiar rumble of an engine was heard as Laura's car pulled up to the house. Michael, hearing the screech of brakes and the slam of the door, stood up from his chair. His heart began to beat faster, but a strange calm remained with him. He knew what he had to say, and he repeated the words in his mind during the last minutes of waiting. The front door opened and Laura walked into the hallway. She was a little surprised to see Michael in the living room. He was usually out at this time or working in his office. "Hello," she greeted cautiously, taking off her coat. "You're early today." Michael watched her silently from the living room doorway. In the lamplight, she looked tired, maybe a little worried. Laura hung up her coat and took a few steps toward him. "Is everything okay? Why didn't you answer my calls during the day?" Michael had indeed noticed that there were missed calls from her on his phone, but he had deliberately not called her back. Now he was barely holding back his nervous trembling. "Finally," he said hoarsely, "I'll tell you everything now. We need to talk, Laura." She became wary. Something in his voice made her freeze a few meters away from him. "About what? You're scaring me." Michael felt anger boiling up inside him as he looked at her worried face. Scared? Was she scared now? He took a deep breath. "Let's talk in the living room," he said dryly, turning to the table. Laura followed hesitantly, clearly feeling the tension her fingers were fiddling with the strap of her bag. "Michael, you're making me nervous." "What happened?" He stood by the coffee table on which lay that very folder. Michael nodded towards it. "What happened is that the truth came out, and I would like to hear this truth from you." Laura glanced quickly at the folder, then at her husband. Her eyebrows drew together. "What are you talking about?" "About you and a certain Mike Handler," Michael said clearly, watching her reaction carefully. Laura flinched as if she had been struck. Her face instantly lost color. She opened her mouth, but he raised his hand, stopping any possible words. "Think carefully before you deny and lie," Michael warned quietly. "I know everything. Where you were last night, where you went, what time you left the motel." His voice trembled, but he continued, "And how you kissed him goodbye." Laura looked at her husband, stunned. She seemed speechless. In the silence that followed, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. Finally, she squeezed out, "Michael, it's not what you think." He smiled bitterly. "Not what I think. Seriously, you couldn't come up with anything smarter." His calm began to crack. "What is this then? Enlighten me. A business meeting? A sexual meeting in a motel?" Laura turned even paler and covered her face with her hands. "Oh my God," flashed through my fingers. "How? Who told you that?" "Nobody slandered me," Michael snapped. "I have photographs. Witnesses." He opened the folder and fanned the photos out on the table. Laura lowered her hands timidly and glanced at them. Her eyes widened in horror when she saw herself in the photos next to her lover at the hotel door in the car. "Michael." She took a step towards him, raising her hands as if pleading. "Let me explain." "Explain?" Michael felt himself starting to boil. "Come on, explain. I'm very interested in how you're going to explain the nights with your lover behind my back. Come on, Laura, I'm listening." He burst into a scream. Laura recoiled, tears streaming from her eyes. "I'm sorry," she stammered, covering her face. "Forgive me. I didn't mean to hurt you." Michael let out a bitter laugh. "You didn't want to hurt me. What have you been doing these past few months? Every single day, you've been hurting me. You slept in the same bed with me. You said, 'I love you.' And you were running around on dates with this guy. I'll explain everything," Laura sobbed, coming closer. "Please, don't shout. Let me speak." "Speak," he said through gritted teeth, resisting the urge to back away as she approached. Laura dropped her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her lips trembled. She began haltingly. It, it wasn't on purpose. I met Mike at work. He was in charge of our finances. At first, we just talked. Then we somehow became close. I didn't plan it, honestly. Everything started spinning. I didn't even understand how. You could have stopped, Michael interrupted harshly. You don't understand it yourself. Excuses for teenagers, Laura. She sobbed. It's my fault. Yes, it's my fault. But understand, I lacked something. Warmth, attention. Not enough attention. Michael stared at her in shock. All I did all these years was carry you in my arms. She didn't have enough attention. You were missing at work. Laura suddenly cried out through her tears. Always tired, withdrawn lately. I felt lonely. And that's why you decided to find another man. Is that the solution to the problem, in your opinion? I wasn't going to bars. I wasn't hanging out with my friends. I was at work. Michael raised his voice again, the pain and rage spilling over the edge. So it's my fault that you went and cheated on me? Laura shook her head, desperately trying to reach out and take his hands. No, it's not my fault. No one is to blame but me. Forgive me, I beg you. It was some kind of obsession, a mistake. It's all over now. Michael stepped back, not letting her touch him. He was shaking. Over? When did it end? Before or after the motel yesterday? He glanced at the photographs on the table. Laura felt ashamed and looked away. Today I put an end to it, she sobbed. I realized that I was going crazy, that all this was wrong. I wanted to tell you everything myself, honestly. Tell me yourself. Michael smiled bitterly. When? After 10 years or 20? Or when he left his wife? Laura looked up. How? How do you know that he is married? It doesn't matter anymore, he said wearily. Disgust washed over him. So many lies, so much dirt. Enough, Laura. Just enough. She suddenly fell to her knees right in front of him, trying to catch his hands. Please, don't go. Don't leave me. I love you, really. It was all a mistake. Stupidity. I understand everything. I don't need him. Only you. Michael looked down at his once beloved wife. She seemed pathetic now. He felt an icy emptiness. He slowly removed the hands she was trying to touch and said quietly, If you loved him, you wouldn't be in bed with him. Laura burst into tears even more loudly, her sobs shaking her fragile shoulders. Forgive me. Forgive me. I'll do whatever you say. Do you want me to quit? Change my number? I'll never see him again. Just give me a chance. I beg you. There was such a pleading tone in her voice that in another situation Michael might have taken pity, but now he was adamant. A chance echoed in the empty soul. For what? So that I would suffer every night. Where are you and with whom? No, Laura. It's over. She burst into tears, shaking her head. No, don't say that. Don't go. For God's sake, for the sake of all our years. You crossed out our years yourself, he cut her off harshly. I'll file for divorce. It will be better for both of us. Laura froze, sobbing. She searched his face for hope, even a shadow of doubt. But Michael was as hard as stone. Then her face suddenly changed. Despair was replaced by panic and anger. So, like this, you don't even try to forgive. You ruin everything right away. Michael flushed. Yes, it was you who destroyed everything. Our marriage was already destroyed by you and that idiot, not by me. Now all I have to do is pick up the pieces. Laura stood up, swaying, and ran her hand over her tear-stained cheeks. So you decided. Divorce. She sobbed and wiped her nose with the back of her hand. How is this possible? Michael, please. Let's try to save it, okay? I know I ruined everything, but maybe we can start over. I'm ready to do anything for this. Anything. Michael closed his eyes tiredly. It was unbearable to hear her pleas, but his heart had already hardened to these words. He said quietly, I'm sorry, Laura. I don't believe you anymore, and I can't anymore. She burst into tears, rushing towards him, trying to hug her, but he carefully pulled away. No need, Michael stepped back. Please. For a few seconds they stood opposite each other, she, trembling, in tears, and he, devastated, with a frozen face. Finally, Michael broke the silence. I'll spend the night with friends tonight, and tomorrow I'll come back for my things. Laura shook her head in denial. holding out her hands to him. "No, don't go, please." He walked around her and headed for the exit. She followed him, sobbing. "Michael, talk to me. Don't leave like this." Michael stopped at the threshold and turned around one last time. Laura's eyes were pleading and terrified, like someone who realized she had lost something priceless. Perhaps for the first time in all this time, she truly understood what she had done. But it was too late. "Goodbye, Laura," Michael said quietly and opened the door. The cold night air hit him in the face as he stepped through the door. A muffled groan came from behind him as Laura sobbed and covered her face with her hands. Michael froze for a moment. A lump rose in his throat, but he clenched his fists. No, it was decided. He slammed the door behind him and walked toward the car. In all their years together, they had never gone to bed having argued. Now the family home was left behind in darkness, silence, and bitter tears. Michael spent the night in the guest room of Jack and Rachel's house. He arrived at almost midnight, right after his breakup with Laura. Despite the late hour, Jack was waiting for him and did not go to bed. Rachel was not sleeping either. As soon as they heard the slam of the front door, they immediately went out to meet him. Michael walked in with his head down. There was emptiness in his soul. There were no more tears left, only dull pain and fatigue. Jack and Rachel, seeing his condition, did not ask questions in the hallway. They led their friend into the living room and sat him down on the sofa. "It's over," Michael said quietly after a long silence, without taking his eyes off the floor. "I told her I'm filing for divorce." Jack nodded sadly, sitting down next to him and placing his hand on his back. "How did she react?" Michael closed his eyes tiredly. "She cried, begged for forgiveness. Then she got angry, but I left." He ran his hand over his face. He himself couldn't believe that all this had happened in reality. Rachel crouched down on his other side and covered his cold, trembling hand with hers. "Now you need to rest. You look completely exhausted." "Yes," Michael agreed barely audibly. "Stay with us as long as you need," Jack said firmly. "You're always welcome, you know that." Michael nodded gratefully. His throat was sore again, but no tears were flowing. Apparently, there were none left. "I've got your room ready," Rachel added softly. "There's a clean towel in there, everything you need. Try to get some sleep, okay?" Michael stood up hesitantly. His own body felt foreign to him, heavy and cottony. "Thank you, and I'm sorry." Rachel just shook her head in response. "Don't you dare apologize. We're really worried about you." Jack stood up too. "Really, enough of this ceremony. Go and rest. The morning is wiser than the evening." Michael wandered into the guest bedroom. In all his years, he couldn't remember sleeping alone in a strange room, knowing that no one was waiting for him at home anymore. The thought of it weighed heavily on him. Michael exhaled loudly, pushing away the rising panic. "This is temporary," he reminded himself. "Life doesn't end here." And yet, inside, he felt terribly lonely. He remembered how just yesterday morning he had a family, a home, a familiar life, and now ruins. "Maybe I was too hasty," flashed through his mind, but he immediately dismissed the thought. No, trust can no longer be restored. He did not want to forgive betrayal with all his heart. Towards morning, I finally managed to fall into an anxious oblivion. Michael woke up with a heavy feeling, but looking around and remembering that he was not at home, he even felt relief. It was better to wake up visiting than next to a person who had betrayed him. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning when he came out into the kitchen. The voices of Jack's children could be heard from the slightly open door of the nursery, presumably getting ready for school. Rachel greeted Michael in the kitchen with a warm smile, although there was sadness in her eyes. "Good morning," she said quietly. "Would you like some coffee?" "Good. Yes, thank you," Michael replied, sitting down on a chair. His phone showed several missed calls. His parents had tried to call him late at night after reading his message about the divorce. Michael decided to call them back a little later. He knew they would support him from a distance, and of course, they were worried. A minute later, Jack's 7-year-old daughter, Emma, ran into the kitchen with her hair braided. When she saw Michael, she jumped up and down happily. "Uncle Michael, did you spend the night with us?" Michael tried to smile. "Yes, princess. I decided to visit you." The girl hugged him around the neck unexpectedly tightly. "Will you come to our party in the fall? Remember, you promised." "Emma, don't distract me," Rachel's daughter gently admonished, placing a cup of hot coffee in front of Michael. "Go check if you've packed everything in your backpack." "Okay." Emma let go of Michael and ran into the hallway. Rachel looked after her with a smile. "Sorry, she doesn't understand yet." "It's okay." Michael shook his head, feeling a lump rise in his throat from this innocent, childish hug. "Everything's fine." Jack entered the living room, already dressed for work. He switched to a businesslike tone in a half-word. "Mike, I've been thinking. You'll need a lawyer. I have a good friend who specializes in family law. Do you want to set up a meeting?" Michael, cupping his hands around the cup, nodded. "I think so. A little later, when I need to deal with the paperwork." It was strange and bitter to say all this. Just yesterday, he had not imagined that he would talk about divorce. Jack sat down next to him. "I understand that you don't have time for this now, but it's better not to drag things out. If you've decided to get a divorce, act and take care of yourself from the legal side." Michael knew his friend was right. "Okay, thank you. Give me the contact. I'll probably call you later." "No problem." Jack put the business card he had taken out of his wallet on the table. "You can call him today if you want." Uh-huh. Michael automatically pulled the card closer and read the lawyer's name. The thought of an imminent meeting with a lawyer made what was happening frighteningly real. Jack clapped him on the shoulder, softening his voice. "And I also thought, we were planning to go to the lake house next week with the whole family, remember? Come with us. You need some fresh air." Michael tried to object. "I don't know, I don't want to be embarrassed." "Stop it," the friend snapped. "It's not up for discussion. Fresh air and our noisy get-togethers are better for you than any doctor right now." Rachel served warm toast and added softly, "Really, Michael. Let's go. We won't let you mope around alone." Michael smiled slightly for the first time all morning. The care of these people was like a balm. "Okay, thank you. I'll try to go." He understood that there would be a lot of trouble in the coming days, but he would try to get away for at least a day. Jack soon left to take the children to school and then to work. Rachel stayed home, promising to look after Michael, although he was reluctant to admit that he needed supervision. But deep down, he was glad not to be alone. Around noon, he decided to go home and get his things. Laura texted him, "I'm leaving the house today so you can get everything you need in peace. I'm so sorry." Michael didn't respond, but the news made things easier. He didn't want to make more scenes. He was grateful for that, at least. Rachel volunteered to go along, but Michael asked her to stay. "Thanks, but I'll do it myself. There won't be anyone there." "Okay," she agreed, "but then come back to us right away, okay?" Michael promised. His heart was heavy as he pulled up to his house. Laura kept her word. Her car was gone. The windows were closed. Michael went inside. There was silence everywhere, only the clock ticked steadily. Her coat was hanging in the hallway. Some papers were lying on the nightstand. She had probably prepared documents for him, perhaps a marriage certificate. Everything looked familiar and alien at the same time. Michael walked through the rooms. The photographs from the night before were still scattered on the table in the living room. He swallowed hard, gathering them back into the folder and slamming it shut. Then he went upstairs to the bedroom. The bed was rumpled. It seemed Laura had slept poorly or had been tossing and turning for a long time. On the pillow on his side, Michael noticed a dark spot, either from a tear or from mascara. He froze for a moment, then resolutely turned away. Now was not the time to feel sorry or emotional. He quickly packed a suitcase with the essentials: clothes, essentials, a laptop. Most of the rest could be picked up later, once everything was sorted out. As he pulled the suitcase out of the closet, his gaze fell on the wedding album, pressed against a stack of old letters on the top shelf. His heart sank. Michael reached for it, but stopped himself. Not now. He went downstairs and looked around the living room again. On the mantelpiece were their photos together, a happy young couple on the beach, the two of them at a friend's party. Michael suddenly realized that he didn't want to see them. He took the frames off and put them on the sofa, let Laura decide their fate. It hurt him to look at them now. As he said goodbye, he slowly looked around his familiar walls. How much good there was in this house. Now everything had become ghostly. Michael felt his hands shaking as he stepped outside and locked the door with the key. He leaned on the porch railing, trying to calm himself. This is the last time, he told himself. Soon it would be legal, and he might not have to come back here. The thought was both painful and relieving. Michael got in the car and headed back to Jack. Ahead of him was a new stage, the official formalization of the breakup, the discussion of details, the paperwork, the trial. He didn't yet know how difficult it would be, but inside he was growing the desire to get through this quickly and leave the past behind. Returning to his friend's hospitable home, he felt a weight lift from his soul. He was welcomed as if he were family. Rachel had laid out dinner. Jack had returned early from work. During the meal, they tried to talk about other things, the children, plans for the weekend. No one mentioned Laura's name, and Michael was grateful for the respite. However, closer to the evening, he still had to plunge into reality. He called the lawyer Jack had mentioned and arranged a meeting for the next day. The conversation was short and businesslike. Michael said that he wanted to initiate divorce proceedings and divide property as peacefully as possible. That night, he went to bed a little more peacefully. In the next room, a family of friends who had sheltered him in his difficult times slept peacefully. Michael closed his eyes, thinking about the many unknowns ahead. But he knew one thing for sure: he was not alone. And no matter how hard it was, with the support of his loved ones, he would cope. The next day, Michael met with the recommended divorce lawyer. His name was Thomas Reed, an older, respectable man with an attentive gaze. In a small, cozy office with shelves of law books, Thomas listened to Michael's story with professional sympathy. "So, you are determined to get a divorce," the lawyer concluded, writing a couple of lines in his notebook. "You have no children, and as far as I understand, there is not much jointly acquired property. A house, 2 cars, bank accounts, right?" "That's right," Michael confirmed. "The house is jointly owned, the mortgage is almost paid off. Each of us has our own car. We have a little bit of savings, and our pensions are separate. There shouldn't be any major arguments, I hope." He said this and did not believe that he was now discussing the division of life into before and after. But reason demanded that he focus on practical steps. "Well, that simplifies things," Thomas nodded. "Would you like to settle things as peacefully as possible, through an agreement?" Michael thought for a moment. On the one hand, he wanted to break all the threads as soon as possible. On the other hand, he didn't want to start a war out of revenge. Additional months of litigation would only prolong his torment. "Yes," he replied. "I don't want long scandals. I want to finalize the divorce as quickly as possible." The lawyer folded his hands politely. "I understand. Then there are 2 ways. Either we agree with your wife amicably about the division, or if she suddenly starts to interfere, we go through the court. But you say that she also regrets and perhaps will be accommodating." Michael nodded. "She wrote to me that she was sorry. I think she won't complicate things out of guilt. She herself probably wants to close this page as soon as possible." The words came hard, but he forced himself to speak clearly. "Good. Then we can prepare a statement of claim for divorce today," the lawyer continued. "In our state, this is done on the basis of irreconcilable differences. It is not necessary to indicate the fact of adultery. If you want, you can indicate marital infidelity as a basis, but usually this is more of a moral issue. Legally, it does not have much influence on the division of property." "I understand," Michael responded. "It's not important to me to write her guilt into the documents. The main thing is to separate." Thomas chuckled affirmatively. "A practical approach. Then we fill it out as standard. Now about the property. The house, it is assumed that you will sell it and split the amount, or one will buy out the other. Any preferences?" Michael thought. The house was dear to him, but without Laura, he saw no point in staying there, and the memories. Probably sell and divide. I don't want to live there. I see. Each person will keep their own car. Bank accounts give me a statement. Let's see. No joint loans? No, Michael handed the lawyer a prepared statement of the mortgage and joint account. The mortgage is almost paid off. There is a small amount left. We will close it when we sell the house. Thomas looked through the papers and wrote something down. Excellent. In terms of spousal support, do you have a similar income? Yes, about the same level, Michael confirmed. I don't think anyone will demand maintenance. In that case, we'll skip this point. The lawyer agreed. Now the procedure. Today we'll file a claim with the court. A copy of it needs to be officially handed to your wife. Do you want to do it yourself, or is it better to send it through a courier? Michael winced at the thought of personally serving Laura the divorce papers. Probably through a courier. I don't want to see you anymore. I understand. We will arrange delivery through the secretary, Thomas reassured. After delivery, the countdown for a possible reconciliation begins formally. A period is given before the court makes a decision, usually a few weeks. But if both agree, everything will go quickly. Michael smiled sadly. There will be no reconciliation. Then I suppose you will receive a divorce certificate in a couple of months at most, the lawyer concluded. We still have to sign an agreement on the division of property. I will prepare a draft, and if your wife does not object, we can do without meetings, only by an approved agreement. That would be nice, Michael sighed. The thought of a protracted court battle depressed him. He and the lawyer discussed a few more details. Michael left Laura's contact information so that the office could send her documents, and they exchanged phone numbers for quick communication. Thomas assured that he would take over negotiations with Laura's lawyer if she hired him. When everything was settled, Michael signed the prepared papers. His hand shook slightly as he wrote his signature on the divorce papers. The line, reason for divorce, was kept simple, irreconcilable differences. No mention of the storms of pain that lay behind that wording. Well, Thomas concluded, putting the documents in a folder. The first steps have been taken. Hang in there, Mr. Davis. Divorce is a difficult test, even when the decision is made firmly. But sometimes it really is the best decision. Michael smiled dryly. Thank you. I understand. Walking out of the law office onto the sunlit street, Michael felt like he was barely breathing. He took a few deep breaths and leaned against the cold brick wall of the building. Everything inside him was shaking, either from nerves or relief. The process had begun. There was definitely no turning back now. A couple of hours later, he pulled out his phone and saw a new message from Laura. I got the papers. If it's better for you, I'll agree to everything. Forgive me. Michael closed his eyes, trying not to imagine her writing that, probably crying. Returning to Jack, he told his friends about the meeting with the lawyer. Jack patted him on the shoulder. Everything is going as it should. You are great for organizing everything so clearly. Yes, was all Michael could answer, wearily sinking down onto the sofa. Now it remained to survive the legal formalities themselves and learn to live with a new status, soon not a husband, but a divorcee. It was necessary to discuss the details of selling the house with Laura to separate completely. But a lawyer would take care of all this, if possible, protecting them from unnecessary meetings. Michael really hoped for this. That night, alone in the spare room, he reread the draft of the divorce agreement Thomas had sent him in the mail. The dry clauses distributed material goods, but made no mention of love or trust, the invisible treasures he and Laura had lost. Michael closed his laptop. He couldn't think about it anymore. He knew there were still difficult moments ahead, perhaps a meeting with Laura to sign papers, or even in court. He was mentally preparing himself for this. He would remain calm, dignified, for the sake of his future. I can handle it, Michael whispered to himself in the void, and, turning onto his side, he tried to fall asleep. A few weeks after the papers were filed, the divorce process entered its final phase. Fortunately for Michael, everything went relatively smoothly. Laura agreed to all the proposals. they settled the main issues through lawyers. The house was put up for sale, and they decided to split the proceeds equally. Each kept the cars and personal accounts for themselves. There were almost no contentious details left. Laura gave Michael most of the household appliances and furniture without objection, saying that she would live with a friend for now and that extra things would only get in her way. It was a cool, gray day in early fall when they were about to sign a settlement agreement in a lawyer's office. It was the first time Michael and Laura had seen each other face to face since the night they had separated. They were both nervous, though they tried to act calm. Michael arrived a little early and waited in the reception area with his lawyer, Thomas. He looked out the window at the drizzle, feeling his insides tighten at the prospect of the meeting. I hope there are no scenes, he thought. Soon Laura entered with her lawyer. Michael couldn't help but hold his breath when he saw her. She had noticeably lost weight and looked pale and tired. Her hair was pulled back into a severe bun, and there were shadows under her eyes. When she saw her husband, she paused for a second, then nodded timidly to him. Michael nodded back, his chest tightening with memories as he saw her familiar face, but he tried to keep his expression neutral. The four of them walked into the conference room. The lawyers immediately laid out their papers, exchanging formal phrases about the weather and the process of selling the house. The atmosphere was businesslike and cold. So, here are all the terms of the agreement, Thomas began, pushing the documents toward Laura and her representative. Please read them, and if everything is correct, sign them. Laura looked down at the papers, her hands shaking slightly as she turned the pages. Her lawyer quietly clarified a couple of legalese, but when he was satisfied that everything was in order, he sat back in his chair. Michael also skimmed through the agreement, even though he knew it by heart. The specific numbers and phrases blurred before his eyes. He glanced furtively at Laura. She was carefully reading the last page, biting her lip, a habit she had retained from her youth. Feeling his throat tighten with emotion, Michael looked away and concentrated on the signature he was about to write. Laura was the first to sign. She picked up a pen, took a deep breath, and wrote a sweeping signature at the bottom of the page. Laura Davis. She hadn't changed her last name yet. Then she moved the document slightly toward Michael, looking up. Your turn, she said in a low voice. Michael put his pen down on the paper and wrote firmly, Michael Davis. The two signatures stood side by side, completing their story as a family. Thank you, Thomas stated dryly, taking the papers. Now I will submit the agreement to the court. All that remains is to wait for the final hearing date to be set. The lawyers stood up, shaking hands. It was decided that the court hearing itself, the formal proceedings, would not require the parties to be present. The lawyers would do everything themselves unless the judge ordered otherwise. This meant that Michael and Laura might not have to see each other officially again. If my personal presence is required, I will let you know, Thomas said to Michael. But I think everything will be fine. Okay, Michael nodded. At this point, the lawyer's role ended for the day. They exchanged assurances of further communication and headed for the exit, leaving the former spouses alone in the conference room for a few moments. Michael stood up, about to follow, but stopped. Laura stood up slowly, clutching the folder with the copies of the agreement to her chest. They looked at each other in silence for a few seconds. Laura spoke first, her voice quiet and tense. Thank you for making everything peaceful, without war. Michael looked down. It's better for both of us. Laura nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I'm really sorry, Michael, about everything. He was silent, not knowing what to answer. Apologies could no longer change anything, but hearing them was still painful, and at the same time it eased his soul at least some sincerity at the end. I know, was all he said. Laura continued timidly. I appreciate that you acted with dignity. Many in your place would have. Destroyed me. But you divided everything fairly. There was bitter gratitude in her voice. Michael sighed. I didn't see the point in taking revenge. What's done is done. We both need to move on. A tear rolled down Laura's cheek. She quickly brushed it away. You, how are you in general? Are you holding up? The question caught him off guard. You shouldn't worry about it anymore. I can handle it. Laura looked at her hands, clutching the folder, and said quietly, You deserve to be happy, Michael. Really. I hope you too will be happy someday, in your own way. Laura could hardly hold back her tears. She nodded, lowering her head. Don't worry about me. I got what I deserved. Silence fell over the room. Outside the window, it was still drizzling, the drops tapping on the glass. Finally, Michael said quietly, I guess it's time for us to go. Yes, Laura agreed in a whisper. They headed for the door at the same time. At the threshold, Laura suddenly turned to him. Can I hug you goodbye? Michael was confused, but looking into her pleading eyes, he only nodded. She stepped closer and gave him a tentative hug. He responded with a light pat on the back. The hug was short, awkward, and sad. Goodbye, Michael, Laura whispered, pulling away. Goodbye, he answered quietly. Without another word, they walked out into the hallway together. At the elevator, their paths diverged. Laura was led to the exit by her lawyer and Michael by his. Looking at each other for the last time, the former spouses tried to smile sadly. A minute later, the elevator doors closed, and their lives finally went their separate ways. That evening, Michael sat for a long time on the porch of Jack's house, watching the small autumn drops fall from the sky. The divorce had not yet been officially announced, but in essence, he and Laura had said goodbye today. He felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. He felt sorry for the love that had collapsed, for the years that had been wasted. But on the other hand, for the first time in a long time, his soul was not eaten away by painful suspicion and resentment. Everything had already happened and was left behind. A door creaked quietly nearby, and Jack came out onto the porch with 2 mugs of beer. He handed one to Michael and sat down next to him, silently. Together, they looked out at the dark street, lit by yellow lanterns. Thank you, Michael said quietly, accepting the mug. Jack smiled slightly. For what? Michael took a sip of the bitter, foamy drink and quietly replied, For just sitting next to me. Jack nodded understandingly and clapped his friend on the shoulder. Always, Mike, always. They drank beer and were silent. The autumn rain drizzled, washing away traces of the past and promising a new spring in the life of Michael, who, although he did not yet fully realize it, had already taken the main step towards his future. The autumn sun shone dimly through the yellowing leaves when Michael and Laura's marriage story came to a legal end. In mid-October, the court formally approved their agreement and issued a divorce decree. Neither Michael nor Laura had to be present in person. Everything was done in absentia, through lawyers. Thomas called Michael immediately after the hearing and dryly informed him, As of today, you are a free man. The court has issued a divorce decree. After hanging up, Michael sat silently for a few minutes, trying to process the words. Free. He looked at the calendar on his phone, a date that would forever be a milestone for him. Of course, in essence, it had all ended earlier, but now it had become a fact, recorded by the state. Jack, as always, was there at the right moment. Upon learning that the divorce was officially finalized, he immediately asked to leave work early, picked up Michael, and drove him out of town. The long-promised trip to the lake with his family, which they had planned for a break, could not have come at a better time. The drive to the lake took a couple of hours. Rachel and the kids followed in their car, and Michael and Jack were ahead in Jack's car. They were silent for most of the journey. Only when the city was behind them and endless forests stretched around them, Jack asked quietly, Well, how do you feel? Michael looked at the gold and crimson trees flashing past the window. He tried to figure himself out. I don't know. It's kind of empty, he admitted. I guess it takes time to fully understand. Jack nodded understandingly, slowing down before turning onto a dirt road. It's normal. The main thing is that you did everything right. Now only forward. Michael smiled sadly. Forward. Yes, there is no other way. Jack glanced at him quickly. Look, Mike, I know it sounds trite now, but life doesn't end there. Trust me, in a year you won't recognize yourself. Everything will be different, easier, better." Michael remained silent, but his friend's words echoed somewhere inside him with a quiet hope. Arriving at the lake, they left their cars at a small wooden house that Jack's family had rented for the weekend. The place was stunningly beautiful. Clear water, forests all around, colorful with autumn foliage. It was quiet, only the wind rustled the fallen leaves. "This is great," Jack said, getting out of the car and stretching. "Just what I needed." Rachel and the children arrived, and a flurry of unloading began. Michael, although tired, helped carry bags and lit a fire in the fireplace. Children's laughter soon filled the house as Emma and her younger brother Dylan ran around, exploring the new place. Late in the afternoon, Jack pulled out his fishing rods. He was an avid fisherman and invited Michael to come ashore to try to catch some fish for dinner. The two of them walked along a path lined with pine needles to the lake itself. The air was crisp, with a faint smell of smoke from distant fires. The sun was fading in the sky, preparing to set. Sitting with fishing rods on a small dock, the friends chatted leisurely about trivialities, about the children's school, about how Jack wanted to do some home renovations in the spring, about plans for the Christmas holidays. Michael caught himself thinking that for several minutes he had not thought about either the divorce or Laura. A light breeze played with his hair, the float swayed on the water, all this brought calm. "You know," Michael said quietly after a pause, not taking his eyes off the lake. "Thank you for dragging me out here." Jack smiled with the corner of his lips, continuing to watch the line. "Rachel, and I thought it would be good for you to get some fresh air. You can't just sit inside and bury your nose in papers all the time." Michael nodded. He suddenly realized that he hadn't looked at his phone or checked his email all day, so out of the habit of carefree rest he had become over the past few months. "I forgot what it was like." Jack gave him a careful look, but didn't answer directly. He just said, "It will come back. Be patient a little longer." Soon the sun touched the horizon, and the friends returned to the house. Fishing had brought them a couple of small trout. Rachel enthusiastically began to bake them on the grate of the fireplace, seasoning them with rosemary. The children told Michael that they had found an old boat near the house and had seen a beaver in the distance. At dinner by the fire, for the first time in a long time, Michael found himself laughing. Little Dylan was trying to pronounce the word trout in a funny way and called it torrel, which made his sister laugh. Rachel was telling funny stories about work. Jack was pouring apple cider for everyone and making good-natured jokes about his own culinary failures. Michael felt like he was part of a warm family circle. Somewhere deep inside his soul, there was still sadness, but the warmth surrounding him gradually melted the ice. After dinner, when the children went to sleep in the attic under their blankets, the adults went out onto the porch of the house with mugs of hot tea. The sky was strewn with stars, lonely crickets were calling to each other in the distance. "Do you think," Rachel said thoughtfully, wrapping herself in a blanket, "that the day will come when we'll go on holiday like this with the whole big group? Well, I mean, with your new other half?" "Rachel, give the man a break," Jack grumbled good-naturedly, nudging his wife with his elbow. But Michael only smiled sadly. "Nothing. The question is correct. I don't know if I'll want more." He stopped short, searching for the right word. "Love?" Rachel asked softly. Michael sighed, looking at the distant lights of the stars. "Probably, yes." Jack took a noisy sip of tea. "It's hard to say now, but as an old friend, I say, you'll want to. Just don't rush. Everything has its time." Michael said nothing. He knew his friends wished him well, and he believed that the wound would heal someday. But he couldn't imagine new love right now. The night passed quietly. In the morning, Michael woke up before everyone else and went out to the lake shore alone. The fog spread over the water, the colors of dawn spread across the sky. He took a deep breath of the damp air and felt a strange clarity in his head. He remembered the words he had once read, "A new morning is a chance to start over." This day was indeed the first day of his new life without Laura, without lies, without pain. Yes, there would still be many difficult moments ahead, But standing here by the quiet lake, Michael suddenly felt a timid confidence. He could handle it. Footsteps sounded behind them as Jack approached, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed one to Michael. The two friends stood shoulder to shoulder in silence, watching the sun rise over the forest. "It's going to be a good day," Jack said quietly. Michael looked at him and smiled gratefully. "I think yes." Winter gave way to early spring, and Michael's life gradually settled into a new direction. After the new year, he finally moved out of Jack and Rachel's, although they had not rushed him into it. In early February, the house was sold, and Michael used his share to rent a bright 2-room apartment not far from the center. It was much smaller than the old house, but the space was entirely his, without the painful memories. Day after day, he rebuilt his life. In the mornings, Michael began jogging in the nearby park. He had never had time for it before, but now he loved these lonely runs under the treetops, with calm music playing in his headphones and his thoughts gradually clearing. Work also helped him to distract himself. His superiors noted his immersion in his work. In recent months, Michael took on a couple of complex projects and successfully completed them, for which he received praise and even a small promotion. His colleagues, of course, were aware of the divorce rumors spread quickly in the office, but they treated him tactfully. Someone tried to casually invite him to corporate events, to pull him up into society. At first, Michael refused, but gradually began to accept invitations, at least occasionally. One such spring day, he was sitting in his new apartment, sorting through boxes of books. A ray of sunlight fell on the floor. Birds were chirping outside the window. April was delighting with its warmth. Several posters were already hanging on the living room wall, and photos with his parents and friends were lined up on the shelf. He had put the photos with Laura away in a box on the mezzanine. He hadn't thrown them out to keep, but he didn't put them in front of his eyes anymore. The intercom rang. Jack and Rachel arrived with their children. They volunteered to help with a small housewarming. The children immediately ran in happily to inspect the new home of Uncle Mike. Emma gave out a couple of elegant pictures that she had drawn herself. One was of their company relaxing on a lake in the sun. Michael, smiling, hung the children's masterpiece on the refrigerator with a magnet. "Well, I'll say you've got a great little nest," Jack concluded, looking around. "It's cozy here." "And the view from the window is wonderful," Rachel added, looking out onto the green courtyard below. "Thanks, I tried," Michael responded. "I'm glad I moved." And it was true. As he moved into his new place, he felt like he was leaving the shadow of the past behind. The pages of the divorce proceedings had been turned over, the divorce certificate was in a file, the property had been divided, and contact with Laura had been reduced to a minimum. They had exchanged only a couple of text messages about the sale of the house, politely and distantly. Nothing else connected them. His old friend Susan had recently sent a message after learning that the divorce was final. She was interested in how he was feeling and wished him happiness. Michael had responded with sincere gratitude. He held no grudge. On the contrary, he was grateful for the truth that had been revealed by chance, no matter how bitter it was. Their short correspondence was another sign that the past had finally been let go without hard feelings. During a late housewarming dinner at his apartment, Jack raised a glass of orange juice, insisting no alcohol since the kids were present. "I want to propose a toast to a new beginning for our dear friend." Michael smiled sheepishly, but his friends and children looked at him expectantly, and he raised his glass too. "May you have only happiness in this house," Jack continued solemnly. "May no sadness penetrate here. We love you very much and are always near you." "Hooray!" Little Emma suddenly cried out, waving her arms, and everyone laughed. They clinked glasses. Michael's eyes suddenly stung, and he lowered them, hiding the moisture. He was overwhelmed with gratitude to fate for such friends, to himself for having endured a difficult time. After dinner, the guests left, leaving Michael alone in the quiet apartment. He sprawled on the sofa, looking at the ceiling, and suddenly he realized he felt good in this silence. It no longer frightened him and did not crush him with loneliness. It was simply calm. His phone vibrated on the coffee table with a new message. Michael picked it up and read it. A coworker, Catherine, with whom he had been having lunch a lot lately, had invited him to visit a new exhibit at the museum this weekend. In the past, Michael would have probably declined, citing work. But now he suddenly found himself wanting to go. He typed back, "I'd love to go. Thanks for the invite." After sending it, Michael thought about it. He was just enjoying spending time with Catherine, a sweet, cheerful girl who had recently joined their department. He wasn't thinking about any kind of relationship or flirting yet. He was just enjoying the ease of communication. Well, that's progress too, he chuckled to himself. In the evening, he went to the gym, then returned home. After a shower, having made himself some tea, Michael went out onto the balcony. Below, two neighboring children were kicking a ball around. Their mother was watching from a bench. Ordinary life continued around. Michael looked up at the sky, where the first star was fading. He thought about how much had changed in the last year. The pain of betrayal had dulled. Sometimes the memories still washed over him, but as a quiet sadness, not a sharp wound. He had learned to enjoy simple things again: good weather, good food, friendly chatter. Yes, there was still a lot of unknown ahead, but Michael was no longer afraid. He had loyal friends, a favorite business, and gradually regained his self-confidence. He already knew that if life threw him another challenge, he would cope. November came, and with it the family holidays that Michael used to celebrate with Laura's relatives or his parents. This time, for Thanksgiving, he stayed in town. He couldn't fly to his parents because of work and happily accepted an invitation to celebrate the holiday at Jack and Rachel's house. A long table was set in the friends' spacious living room. Rachel was busy in the kitchen with the turkey and trimmings, assisted by her mother, who had come from out of town for the party. Jack was in charge of drinks and entertaining the children, who were trying to steal the pastries before dinner. The air was filled with the aromas of roasted meat, cinnamon, and fried potatoes, a cozy feast of family warmth. Michael arrived early and was immediately immersed in the atmosphere of hospitality. Rachel's mother, an energetic, gray-haired lady, hugged him as if he were her own son and immediately handed him a bowl of signature cranberry sauce. "Hold this, honey, my hands are shaking," she joked, winking. The children dragged Michael into the living room to play a new board game. He laughingly promised to play after dinner, and the house was filled with joyful shouts. When all the dishes were ready, the large company sat down at the table. In addition to Jack and Rachel's family with their children and mother, two more neighbors came, longtime friends of the family. In total, about 10 people gathered, and Michael organically joined this noisy company. He was even entrusted with the honorable duty of carving the turkey, and he, embarrassed, managed to do it to approving applause. After the plates were filled with food, Jack rose from his chair. "Friends, let us traditionally say words of gratitude on this day, each in turn, as desired." Everyone smiled. It was a family tradition. Rachel's mother was the first to thank God and fate for the health of her loved ones and the opportunity to gather together. Then Rachel for the children's success at school and the love in the house. The neighbors thanked each other for their support in difficult times. It was Michael's turn. He was not used to giving toasts, but now he felt an inner need to share. He stood up slowly, looked around at the faces around him, kind, familiar faces of people who had accepted him as a member of the family. A lump rose in his throat, but Michael spoke quietly but firmly. "I want to say thank you to all of you. I am infinitely grateful that today I am sitting at this table, not even as a guest, but as part of this wonderful family." Her voice wavered and Rachel extended her hand, which he shook gratefully. "Thank you, friends," Michael finished simply. "To you." Silence fell. Many wiped away tears. Jack, trying to diffuse the situation, exhaled. "Well, now I'm going to cry too, but I, a man, can't, because my beard doesn't grow from salty tears in the morning." Everyone burst out laughing, and the tension dissolved into friendly laughter. They clinked glasses of cider and juice and began to eat. The evening was surprisingly warm. Michael helped feed little Dylan pumpkin pie, listened to funny stories from neighbors about their summer cottage adventures, and told a couple of funny stories from his work that made everyone laugh. There was coziness and fun at the large round table. When the guests left late in the evening and the children fell asleep, Michael stayed behind to help Rachel and Jack clean up. The three washed the dishes in the kitchen without much effort, joking with each other and occasionally exchanging satisfied smiles. At some point, Rachel suddenly said, hugging both her husband and Michael at once, "How good it is that we are all together. Isn't that happiness?" Jack jokingly crunched his bones, mimicking a bear hug. "This is definitely happiness, strong male happiness." He gently ruffled Michael's hair. Michael laughed, slipping out of the friendly grip. "Hey, be quiet. I have to go to work tomorrow and you have the day off." Rachel threatened her husband with a finger. "Take care of the guests. Better pour tea for everyone." A few minutes later, the three of them were sitting at the already cleared table, finishing their mint tea. The late November rain was pattering outside the windows. The house was warm. Michael felt a pleasant languor after a hearty dinner and a long evening. "Today was a beautiful day," he said quietly, looking around the cozy kitchen where he had been so many times and where he was always expected. Jack nodded, clinking his mug of tea with him instead of beer. "And there will be many more like this ahead." Rachel winked at Michael. "Your birthday is in a month. I warn you, we'll arrange something." Michael smiled, feeling his heart fill with warmth. "I won't be surprised by anything from you anymore, and I'm glad in advance." After saying goodbye, he went out into the night and got into his car. The rain pounded the roof, the windshield wipers rhythmically squeaked on the glass. He had to drive slowly because of the wet road, but Michael was not irritated. He was calm and happy at that moment. Stopped at a traffic light, he thought that there really is something to be thankful for in this world. Sometimes it's the trials that make us stronger, but more often it's the people who help us overcome those trials. He had those people, and he couldn't have asked for a better Thanksgiving present. Another 2 years passed. Michael's life finally got better, the pain went away, leaving only important lessons. A lot happened during this time. He became a department manager in his company, acquired a new circle of friends, and joyful changes appeared in his personal life. One summer day, when the sun was shining gently and the air was filled with the aroma of freshly cut grass, Michael and his company celebrated another joint holiday, Jack's birthday, in the backyard of his house. Steaks and vegetables were crackling deliciously by the grill. Children were running around the yard with water pistols, causing laughter among the adults. Michael stood under the shade of an old maple tree, holding the hand of Catherine, the same colleague with whom he had once gone to the exhibition. Their friendship gradually grew into something more. Catherine got along easily with Jack, Rachel, and their children. It seemed that she was always part of this noisy company. "Hey, you two," Jack called out to them, taking another batch of shashlik off the fire. "Come here, the birthday boy demands attention." Michael and Catherine smiled as they approached the table where everyone was already seated. Rachel was pouring homemade lemonade into tall glasses. Emma and Dylan immediately reached out to clink glasses with everyone. Jack, beaming with joy, put his arms around both his wife and his youngest son. "That's good. Everything is assembled, just the way I like it." He raised his glass. "Thanks to everyone for coming, and a special thanks to Mike and Catherine for making this gorgeous cake." There was indeed a large cake in the center of the table that he and Catherine had made together the day before. "Happy birthday," the guests shouted in chorus. Everyone began to persuade the birthday boy to make a wish and blow out the candles on the cake. Jack, squinting slyly, winked at his wife and children, and then blew out all the bright lights at once to a round of applause. The children enthusiastically shouted, "Hooray!" and Rachel kissed her husband on the cheek. Already cutting the cake into pieces, Jack noticed with a smile that one of his wishes had definitely come true. All his loved ones had gathered nearby in good health and spirits. While everyone was starting to eat, Michael looked around the scene. Children's laughter, Catherine smiling next to him, the happy birthday boy Jack winking at him. His heart was filled with quiet happiness. He carefully put his arm around Catherine's shoulders. She pressed herself against him. Her support became a new source of joy for him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, catching his gaze. Michael shook his head, smiling. Well, I'm just glad to be here and now. Catherine raised herself slightly and kissed him on the cheek. We are glad too. At that moment, Jack clinked a glass of beer with him. Hey, buddy, why so quiet? I'm happy, Michael answered simply, looking his friend straight in the eyes. Jack smiled knowingly and raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. Well, finally, we were already worried. Why isn't Mike complaining about anything? Apparently everything is too good. Everyone laughed. Michael, smiling, responded. Get used to it. Now I have no other reason than to enjoy life. He looked around at everyone gathered, his friends, his girlfriend, the noisy kids, and suddenly he clearly understood. The trials that had befallen him had only made him stronger and closer to those who were truly dear to him. There were people nearby who had gone through the hardest times with him and helped him not to break down. Thanks to them, he had found himself again. He had opened his heart to the world, not becoming embittered, but becoming wiser. Hey, Mike, where are you flying in the clouds? Rachel playfully waved her hand in front of his face. Michael laughed. Here I am, I haven't gone anywhere. He raised his glass of lemonade. I want to thank you all again. Without you, I would not be who I am today. Jack raised his hand to visor his eyes, looking at him with feigned suspicion. You're not by any chance planning to move us to tears again, like you did that Thanksgiving a couple of years ago? Catherine raised her eyebrows in surprise, smiling. Oh, what happened? Rachel whispered to her conspiratorially. We'll tell you later, it's a family legend. Michael brushed aside the friendly teasing, feeling deep gratitude for every moment. He hadn't remembered the past with pain in a long time. Memories had become simply part of his history, important, but not defining his future. The future seemed bright. New goals and hopes stood before him, and close by were the hearts of those close to him, time-tested. As the sun was setting, Michael helped the children collect the scattered toys, and the adults began to clean up after the holiday. He looked at the sunset sky and suddenly clearly felt that his heart was free from the weight of the past. Ahead was a new chapter, which he would write boldly and with a smile, knowing that those who would support him at any moment were nearby. To my loved ones, Michael said again, looking at the smiling faces around him. To our loved ones, everyone chimed in, clinking glasses loudly. Under the warm rays of the sun, the laughter of friends, and the splashing of children in the pool, Michael felt complete harmony. Life went on difficult, unpredictable, but beautiful in its ability to give new chances, and he knew that there were still many happy days ahead of them, which they would definitely share together. He was grateful to fate for everything that had happened. The trials taught him to appreciate the present and his friends to believe in the future. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.